I woke up in the dark, as usual. Old age takes away many things, but not the habit of getting up early. Years of legal practice have taught me to appreciate the morning hours, when my head is fresh and my thoughts are clear. Although now, at 78, I use this time only to sit with a cup of tea and watch the sky change over the bay. Today is a special day. It's my birthday. It used to be a real celebration with noisy guests, presents, and a cake with candles. Wendell always had surprises. It's been 8 years since he passed away, and I still sometimes turn around to tell him something funny, only to remember that I'm talking to emptiness. I slowly made my way down to the kitchen, trying not to disturb my aching knee. My old house creaked and sighed as if it too was suffering from arthritis. 2 stories of Victorian style, built at the end of the 19th century overlooking Port Harlow Bay. The children think it's too big for me on my own. They may be right, but it's the only place I feel truly alive. I made some tea and took out my monthly ritual, my lottery ticket. The one and only ticket I allow myself each month, a symbolic act of protest against my own past. Gambling almost ruined my career as a lawyer. I specialized in family law, helping women get out of toxic relationships, and at night I spent my fees in Boston card clubs. Ironically, I needed the very salvation I offered others. Wendell helped me get out. He was my lifeline, the person who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. After he died, I continued to buy 1 lottery ticket a month, not in the hope of winning, but as a reminder of where I came from and what I had managed to avoid. I carefully placed the ticket in my cardigan pocket and glanced at my watch. The children promised to be home for dinner. Odelia with her husband Toby, Gareth, possibly with his grandson Farrell. Prudence, Gareth's ex-wife, would not be coming, of course. Since the divorce, she has had little contact with the family, except for the bare minimum for Farrell's sake. It's a shame. I always liked her. I spent the morning getting the house ready for the family's visit. A thin layer of dust covered the bookshelves, evidence that the housekeeper my children hire for me comes less often than they think, but I'm not complaining. This little freedom from supervision is worth a lot. By noon, I had set the table in the dining room, an old oak table that seats 12 but now rarely has more than 4 people gathered around it. I took out the good china and silverware that I keep for special occasions. A birthday is reason enough, even if my children don't appreciate it. The doorbell rang at 2 o'clock sharp. Odelia is always punctual. She gets that from me. "Happy birthday, Mom," she said, hugging me. Her perfume, something expensive and understated, filled the hallway. Toby, her husband, stood awkwardly behind her with a bouquet of standard roses. He always felt out of place in this house. "Hi, Martha," he nodded, handing her the flowers. "You look good." Odelia glanced around the hallway and pursed her lips. "Did you forget to turn on the heat in the north wing again? Mom, we told you the pipes could burst." I smiled, resisting the usual provocation. "The north wing is closed, dear. I only use this part of the house." Before I could finish my sentence, another car pulled up. Garrett was always late, even for his own wedding. I remember Prudence standing at the altar, trying to maintain her dignity while my son ran down the aisle out of breath, 17 minutes late. It was a sign we all ignored. Gareth got out of the car, followed by Farrell. My grandson had grown tall and broad-shouldered, with his father's dark hair and his mother's stubborn chin. Now his face was clearly annoyed, probably because he had to spend Sunday with his grandmother instead of his friends. "Grandma!" Gareth broke into a smile, hugging me a little tighter than necessary. He smelled of cologne and a faint whiff of whiskey. 78, huh? Who would have thought? You're still holding up better than most." Farrell reluctantly stepped forward when my father nudged him toward the door. "Hi, Grandma," he muttered, looking over my shoulder. "Hello, Farrell," I replied, trying to catch his eye. "I'm glad you could make it." He shrugged and slipped past me into the house, his eyes glued to his phone. The atmosphere at the table was tense, as it had been for the past few years. Odelia talked about her work at the addiction clinic. Toby nodded without looking up from his plate. Gareth interrupted his sister with stories about his business successes, and Farrell sat with his head buried in his phone, occasionally grunting in response to direct questions. "How's college, Farrell?" I asked, pouring tea. "Have you decided what you want to study?" He looked up from his screen with visible effort. "It's fine. Not yet." "Maybe you should start thinking about it." I continued. At your age. At your age, I was working 2 jobs, Gareth interrupted, filling his glass with wine for the 3rd time. But times have changed, haven't they, son? Nowadays, young people can afford to take their time finding their calling. I noticed Farrell tense up. I know what I want, Dad, he said, but I'm not going to discuss it over tea and cake. Speaking of tea, Odelia interjected, casting a warning glance at her brother and nephew. Mom, we wanted to talk to you about something important. I felt my muscles tense. I knew that tone well from my law practice. It was how people spoke when they were about to say something unpleasant, but were trying to make it sound caring. I'm listening, dear, I replied, sipping my tea. Gareth and I have been discussing your situation, Odelia began, choosing her words carefully. This house is too big for you. You live here alone, refusing any help, and you're 78 years old. We're worried. Very worried, Gareth chimed in. And besides, this neighborhood is becoming more and more expensive. The house could fetch a good price. And where would I go? I asked bluntly, looking at the children. Odelia and Gareth exchanged glances. There's a wonderful place, Odelia continued, called Pine Shores. It's not a retirement home, but more of a community for active seniors. You'll have your own apartment, but with access to medical care, social activities. With other old people like me? I sneered. Mom, don't start, Gareth sighed. We're thinking of your best interests. This house is a constant headache. The roof leaks, the wiring is old, the heating bills are high in winter. And besides, added Odelia, some of the money from the sale could go into an account for Farrell and Sybil. You always said you wanted to secure your grandchildren's future. Here's your chance. I looked at Farrell, who had looked up from his phone and was showing interest in the conversation for the first time. I want to secure their future, I said slowly, but I'm not sure selling the house is the best way to do that. After all, it's my home, and I'm still perfectly capable of living here. Mom, be realistic, Odelia frowned. You're not getting any younger. What if you fall down the stairs? What if there's a fire because of the old wiring? What if a meteorite falls on me? I countered. I'm not going to sell the house and move into a retirement community just because you're eager to get your share of the inheritance. A heavy silence fell. Odelia paled, Gareth blushed, and Toby stared at his plate even more intently. That's exactly why we're worried, Odelia finally said. You're becoming suspicious and irritable. These are signs of, what? Senile dementia? I felt anger boiling up inside me. I've been a lawyer for 35 years, Odelia. I know very well what manipulation looks like. There's no manipulation, Gareth exclaimed. God, Mom, why is it always so difficult with you? We're trying to help. It's time to grow up, I said, addressing Farrell more than Gareth. All of you. Grown-ups solve problems. They don't wait for easy money from selling Grandma's house. Farrell's head shot up, his face contorted with anger. Who are you to talk to me about growing up? He snapped. You sit here in your museum, clinging to the past, and you lecture us. Farrell, Odelia scolded him, but it was too late. No, let her hear me. Farrell jumped up, knocking over his chair. It's always the same. At your age, Farrell. It's time to grow up, Farrell. And what about you? You traded your career for this old house, and now you think you can teach everyone else? I slowly got up, leaning on the table. I think we all need to calm down, I said in an even voice, my years in the courtroom not wasted. It's my birthday, and I don't want— To hell with your birthday, Farrell shouted, taking a step toward me. No one wanted to come here. You think we like pretending we're one happy family? Enough. I straightened up, looking him in the eye. I understand you're upset, but that's no reason. I remember what happened next as if it were in slow motion. Farrell lunged forward, his hand pushing me so hard that I lost my balance. For a moment, I balanced on the edge of the abyss, then flew backward, feeling the world turn upside down. The last thing I saw before the impact was Farrell's frightened face, as if he himself hadn't expected to go that far. The pain didn't come right away. At first, there was only emptiness and a strange feeling of weightlessness. Then I felt the cold of the wall and the heat spreading across the back of my head. Dark spots danced before my eyes. Mom! Odelia's voice sounded as if from far away. Are you okay? I I blinked, trying to focus my eyes. Gareth helped me sit up, his face pale. "Jesus, Farrell, what have you done?" he hissed. Farrell stood to one side, his anger replaced by confusion. "I didn't mean to. She provoked me." "Are you okay, Martha?" Toby asked, taking the initiative for the first time all day. "Should we call an ambulance?" "No, it's okay," I said, getting up with Gareth's help. The room was spinning slightly, but I wasn't going to show any weakness. "I just got a bruise. Nothing serious." "See? I'm fine." Farrell tried to smile, but it came out pitiful. "Everything's fine. Grandma's tough." "Don't dramatize it, Mom," added Odelia, though her voice trembled. "It was just an unfortunate fall. You know Farrell didn't mean it." I looked at my daughter, trying to figure out if she was serious. My own grandson had just pushed me so hard that I hit my head on the wall, and my daughter was telling me not to make a big deal out of it. "Of course," I said, feeling something cold and hard forming inside me. "I understand." "Listen, Grandma, I'm sorry," Farrell muttered, not looking me in the eye. "I got carried away." "You provoked him," Gareth sighed. "He's just a teenager, Mom. You can't put so much pressure on him." "He's 19, Gareth," I pointed out. "He's not a teenager anymore." "See? He's starting again." The rest of the celebration passed in tense silence. Odelia insisted that I lie down while she cleared the table. Toby stood awkwardly nearby, not knowing how to help. Gareth took Farrell aside and whispered something to him, but without much enthusiasm. I heard snatches of phrases. "You can't react like that," and "She's just an old woman." They left earlier than planned. Odelia left containers of food in the refrigerator and a note with the phone number of their family doctor, just in case. Gareth promised to stop by next week and continue the conversation about the house. Farrell avoided looking me in the eye, saying a quick goodbye and rushing out the door first. When the cars disappeared around the corner, I slowly sank into a chair on the porch. My head was spinning, and the wrist I had instinctively used to break my fall was starting to ache. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the realization of what had just happened. My own grandson had hit me on my birthday, and my family had ignored it. How many years had I allowed them to treat me like a burden? How many times had I given in to keep the peace in the family? After Wendell died, I thought my place was to be a kind grandmother who didn't cause any trouble. But what had that gotten me? Humiliation in my own home. I closed my eyes, feeling tears streaming down my cheeks, not from the pain, but from the bitter realization that my children had grown up to be strangers, that my grandson thought it was normal to push a 78-year-old woman. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in my dark thoughts. I was brought out of my stupor by the sound of a postal service vehicle passing by. Overcoming the pain, I descended the steps of the porch and walked to the mailbox by the road. Among the advertising flyers and bills was an official letter from the local lottery. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers, expecting to see the standard, "Unfortunately, your ticket did not win." Instead, I was greeted by the words, "Congratulations, you have won $250,000. I reread the letter 3 times, unable to believe my eyes. The ticket number matched the one in my cardigan pocket. It wasn't a mistake. I had really won. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. What irony. Years of struggling with gambling, years of self-control, and here it was, a win I had never even dreamed of. On the day my family showed their true colors. I carefully folded the letter and hid it in my inside pocket. No one must know about this. Not yet. I slowly returned to the house, each step echoing in my head and wrist. But there was something sobering about the pain, something that helped me see the situation more clearly than ever before. They want me to sell the house and live out my life quietly in Pine Shores, giving them part of the money from the sale for their grandchildren's account. Well, I have another plan. A plan that will require all my legal knowledge and cunning. I, Martha Kingsley, won the lottery on my 78th birthday. But that wasn't the only winning ticket I had in my hands today. I received another ticket, a ticket to freedom from false obligations and fake concern. It was time to use it for its intended purpose. The morning after my birthday greeted me with a throbbing pain in the back of my head and nausea. I turned my head with difficulty on the pillow and saw that it was raining outside. a fine gray rain, endless, as if the sky were mourning yesterday. I tried to sit up, but the room spun, and nausea rose in my throat. Concussion. I had lived long enough to recognize the symptoms. My left wrist was swollen and had taken on an unpleasant bluish-purple hue. Every movement was accompanied by sharp pain. Perhaps it was cracked or even broken. "Don't dramatize," Odelia's voice echoed in my head. I slowly got up, overcoming the dizziness, and limped to the bathroom. The mirror reflected my pale face with a bruise on my cheekbone. Apparently, I hadn't just hit the back of my head. My silver hair, usually neatly styled, now resembled a crow's nest. My first thought was to call the children. They had to see what Farrell had really done. But my hand froze over the phone. What if they said I was exaggerating again? That it was my fault? That it was just an unlucky fall? No. This time, I would do things differently. I struggled down to the kitchen and poured myself some water. Each sip was difficult. My throat felt constricted from the pain in my head. I took a painkiller from the cupboard, swallowed it, and slowly sank into a chair. The lottery ticket was lying on the table where I had left it yesterday. $250,000, an amount that could change my life, and the lives of my children and grandchildren if they treated me with respect. But they didn't deserve it. Not now. I hid the letter in an old cookbook that no one but me had ever opened. If any of the children showed up, they mustn't suspect anything. I spent 3 days in a daze. The pain came and went. I could barely move around the house, holding onto the walls and furniture. I only ate when my stomach started to protest with hunger pangs. Odelia called twice, briefly, between meetings at work. I told her everything was fine, that I was just a little tired after the holiday. She didn't even notice the change in my voice. Gareth didn't call once. On the 4th day, I felt a little better. The dizziness had subsided, although my wrist still hurt with every movement. I decided it was time to see a doctor. Not to Odelia's family doctor, whose number she had left, but to my own, Dr. Brown, who had known me for over 20 years. I called a taxi to his clinic in the next town. There was less chance of running into acquaintances who might tell the children about my visit. "Martha, what happened to you?" Dr. Brown frowned as soon as I entered his office. Short, with a neat gray beard, he always reminded me of a kind gnome from a fairy tale. "I fell badly," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He gave me a skeptical look but didn't ask any further questions. After examining me and taking an X-ray, his expression became even more serious. "You have a moderate concussion and a fracture in the radius of your wrist," he said, showing me the images. "You're lucky there's no intracranial hemorrhage. When did this happen?" 4 days ago. "And you only came for help now?" His voice was disapproving. "Martha, at your age, injuries like this are very dangerous. You need bed rest, a wrist brace, and regular medication. And someone needs to be with you, at least at first." "I can manage on my own," I said firmly. "Your children can help." He paused, as if considering something. "Or is one of them the cause of the injury?" I flinched. Over the years, Dr. Brown had learned to recognize the signs of domestic violence, just as I had in my time. "Not the children," I replied quietly. "My grandson. But they don't see it as a problem." Dr. Brown sighed deeply and took off his glasses, wiping them with a napkin, a gesture he always made when he was troubled. "Martha, I've known you for many years. You've always been a strong woman helping others. Now perhaps it's time to help yourself." He applied a light bandage to my wrist, wrote a prescription, and gave me strict instructions on what to do. I promised to follow them, although we both knew that complete bed rest was impossible in my situation. When I got home, I settled down on the sofa in the living room with a blanket and my pills on the bedside table. The TV was muttering something in the background, but I didn't listen. My thoughts revolved around Dr. Brown's words, "It's time to help yourself." In my 35 years as a lawyer, I had seen hundreds of women in toxic relationships. I had helped them escape, defend their rights, and start new lives. But I was no better than them. I had allowed my own children to turn me into a silent old woman whose opinion meant nothing. The next morning, feeling a little better, I went upstairs to my office. Years of practice had left behind mountains of papers and folders that I had never brought myself to throw away after retiring. Old cases, notes, excerpts from laws, all of it was stored in cabinets and drawers, gathering dust. I opened one of the photo albums stored on the top shelf. The first photo was of me, young, in a strict suit, with a confident smile, standing on the steps of the courthouse. Next to me was Wendell, looking so handsome in his ceremonial bailiff's uniform. We met right there, in the corridors of justice. The next photo was of my first divorce case that I won on my own for a woman whose husband was a well-known businessman in the city. Everyone thought the case was hopeless. He had connections, money, and the best lawyers. But I found evidence of years of psychological abuse and won not only a divorce, but also compensation. I flipped through the pages and my life flashed before my eyes. Here I am with my colleagues at the law firm. Here I am at a women's rights conference giving a presentation. Here I am with my teenage daughter, Odelia, at a school event. I took time off work especially, even though I had an important hearing that day. These photos reminded me of who I used to be. Strong, determined, unafraid to stand up for what was right. What happened to that woman? Where did she go? I found another album dedicated to when my children were little. Odelia with pigtails, Gareth with his perpetually scraped knees, Wendell and I at a picnic, the children running around. Happy, carefree moments. Were we really happy, or was it just a mask for the photos? I remembered the long hours at work, the constant exhaustion, the guilt I felt toward my children for not being able to spend enough time with them. Maybe that's why they treat me so consumingly now? No. I won't allow myself to blame them for their choices. I did everything I could to be a good mother. I worked, provided for them, supported them. The people they grew up to be are the result of their own decisions. Among the papers, I found an old folder with a domestic violence case. A woman whose son started raising his hand against her after his father died. A classic case. The heir believes he can dispose of his mother's property and life. I helped her defend herself, get a restraining order, and have the will revised. All my life I have protected other women from violence, but I couldn't protect myself from my own family. Not physical violence, until yesterday, but emotional violence, definitely. For years, they treated me like a nuisance, like something that needed to be dealt with. In the evening, feeling exhausted but clear-headed, I turned on my computer. Wendell had insisted on buying it shortly before his death, believing that I needed to keep up with the times. At first, I resisted, but over time, I appreciated the opportunity to stay connected to the world without leaving my home. I typed forum for older people into a search engine and found several options. One of them caught my eye. Silver Threads, a community for people over 65. I registered under the name Martak and started browsing the topics. They discussed everything from health problems to recipes, from travel to relationships with children. The last topic particularly caught my attention. I read several stories that were strikingly similar to mine. Elderly parents whose children see them only as a burden or a source of inheritance. Many wrote about pressure to sell their homes, move to nursing homes, and give up their independence. One comment in particular struck me. A user with the nickname Ryback Horace wrote, "Remember that your life belongs to you, not your children. You are not obligated to sacrifice your comfort and happiness for their convenience or greed. Set boundaries and stick to them." I wrote a reply, briefly describing my situation without mentioning details such as winning the lottery. I simply talked about the pressure from my children and how my grandson had pushed me during an argument, which my family had ignored. Not expecting a quick response, I was surprised when I received a private message from Ryback Horace almost immediately. "Hello, Martha. I read your story and couldn't ignore it. What happened to you is unacceptable. I went through something similar with my daughter and son-in-law and know how important it is not to give up now. If you want to talk, I'm here." I replied, and a conversation began. Horace turned out to be an 80-year-old owner of a fishing tackle shop in a seaside town in Maine, not far from Port Harlow. A widower like me, with 2 children and 4 grandchildren. 3 years ago, his daughter and son-in-law tried to have him declared incompetent in court so they could take control of his business. He won the case, but the relationship was irreparably damaged. You know what was the hardest part, he wrote? Not the trial itself. It was realizing that my own child saw me not as a person, but as an obstacle to getting money. But I've learned to live with it. I've even found a new family. Friends, neighbors, even customers at my shop. People who see me as a human being, not a wallet or a burden. We corresponded late into the night. I told him about my career as a lawyer, about my gambling problems in the past, about how I gradually lost my voice in my own family. He was an attentive listener and gave wise advice without the patronizing tone I had so often heard from my children. Before turning off the computer, I made a decision. It was time to take back control of my life, and the first step would be to revise my will. The next morning, overcoming the pain and weakness, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. 3 rings and a familiar voice answered. "Hutchins speaking." "Well, this is Martha Kingsley," I said, surprised at how formal it sounded. We had once been more than colleagues. We had been close friends. There was a pause. Then his voice warmed. "Martha, it's been ages. How are you?" "I've seen better days," I replied honestly. "I need your help, well, professional help." "Has something happened?" "I need to change my will." "Completely. And it has to remain confidential, especially from my children." Another pause. Wellington Hutchins wasn't just a good lawyer. He was a perceptive man who could read between the lines. "I understand," he finally said. "Can you come to my office?" "Not right now," I said, looking at my wrist in its sling. "I've had a bit of an accident. Maybe you could come to my place, if it's not too much trouble." "For you, never," he said, a smile in his voice. "How about tomorrow, around 11? "I'll be waiting." I hesitated. "And, well, thank you." "Don't thank me until you see my bill," he joked, but then added more seriously, "Whatever happens, Martha, remember, you're not alone." When I hung up, I felt a rush of energy I hadn't felt in a long time. A plan began to form in my head. Not just revenge, but justice. Regaining control of my own life. I opened my computer again and wrote to Horace. "Good morning. Thank you for talking to me yesterday. It helped me make an important decision. I'm going to contact my old colleague, a lawyer, and change the will. It's only the first step, but it's an important one." The reply came almost immediately. "Glad to hear it, Martha. Taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary, especially when others don't want to take care of you. Keep me posted if you want." I smiled at the screen. It was strange to find support from a stranger on the internet, but right now I was grateful for any friendly hand. My gaze fell on a framed photo on the table. Me and Wendell on the porch of this house on the day we bought it, 30 years ago. We were both beaming with happiness, holding hands like teenagers. I remembered how he said back then, "This will be our fortress, Martha, a place where we'll always be safe." Now that fortress was under threat, but I wasn't going to give up without a fight. I opened the cookbook again and took out the winning letter. $250,000. Not a fortune by today's standards, but enough to give me freedom. Freedom from blackmail and manipulation by my children. Tomorrow, well would come, and we would begin the process. It would be the first step toward restoring not only my physical health, but also my dignity and independence. I, Martha Kingsley, have lived 78 years, and I have no intention of spending the rest of my life pandering to people who see me as nothing more than a burden or a wallet. Even if those people are my own flesh and blood, the time for pain is over. The time for enlightenment has come. Wellington's visit went better than I expected. Despite the years we had spent apart, we quickly found common ground, as if we had never lost touch. Well hadn't changed much, still fit, sharp-minded, and with a sly gleam in his eyes, although his hair was completely gray and he had more wrinkles. "So your grandson pushed you out?" he asked, looking through the documents I had prepared. "Yes, and no one took my side," I sighed. "Can you believe Odelia told me not to dramatize it?" "I haven't gained any faith in people over the years," Well muttered, making notes in his notebook. "What about the winnings? Are you sure you want to hide them from your family?" "Absolutely," I nodded. "At least for now. If If they find out I have money, they'll either increase the pressure to sell the house or start asking for loans they'll never pay back. Well paused, tapping his pen on the table. It was a habit he'd kept since the days when we worked together on difficult cases. You do realize that eventually they'll find out, he finally said. Yes, but on my terms and in my time. We drew up a new will in which most of my property, including the house, went to a charitable foundation for women who had suffered domestic violence. Odelia and Gareth were left symbolic sums, and my granddaughter Sybil received a small inheritance, which she would receive when she turned 25. Farrell got nothing. Are you sure about Farrell? Well asked. This could cause serious conflict. After what happened? Yes, I'm sure, I replied firmly. We also discussed the best way to dispose of the winnings. Wells suggested opening an account at a different bank, not the one I usually used, to reduce the chances of any of the children accidentally finding out about the money. How do you plan to use the money? He asked when we had finished with the formalities. I hesitated. The idea that had formed in my head was still raw and vague. There's a woman who deserves help, I said cautiously, but I need to talk to her first. Well nodded understandingly, without asking any further questions. That had always been one of his best qualities, his ability to respect other people's personal boundaries. After he left, I continued to think about my plan. I had to act carefully, without arousing my family's suspicions. A strategy began to take shape. I would play the role of a broken, defeated old woman, ready to give in to her children's pressure. This would lull them into a false sense of security and give me time to maneuver. That same day, Odelia called to say she would come visit me over the weekend. I was almost fully recovered, the headaches were less frequent, and although my wrist still hurt, I could move it without sharp pain. However, I decided not to show it. When Odelia arrived with Toby and Sybil on Saturday, I greeted them in my dressing gown, with a shawl thrown over my shoulders, deliberately slouching and leaning on a cane that I usually only used in very bad weather. "Mother?" exclaimed Odelia, entering the living room and seeing me. "What's the matter? Are you ill?" "I'm just feeling a little unwell after my fall," I replied in a weak voice that I hardly recognized. "It's nothing serious, dear. It's just my age catching up with me." Odelia exchanged a worried glance with Toby, who was standing awkwardly at the door. "Have you been to the doctor?" she asked, coming closer and examining the bruise on my cheek, which was already starting to turn yellow. "No, why?" I smiled helplessly. "I just need time to recover." Sybil, my 17-year-old granddaughter, stood at a distance studying me with unusual attention. Unlike her cousin Farrell, she had always been a quiet, observant girl. I noticed her gaze slide over my bandaged wrist, then to the bruise on my face, and then she frowned, as if calculating something in her mind. "Mom, that looks more serious than just a fall," Odelia said, sitting down next to me on the couch. "Maybe you should see Dr. Gates." "Don't bother him," I paused, then added with a carefully measured dose of humility, "You know, I've been thinking about what you and Gareth were saying. Maybe you're right about the house. It really is too big for me." Odelia froze, unable to believe her ears. We both knew how stubbornly I had resisted the idea of selling the house in the past. "Really?" Her voice was filled with surprise mixed with poorly concealed triumph. "What changed your mind?" "The fall made me think," I sighed, looking like a woman who had accepted the inevitable. "What if no one is around next time? I could lie there for hours before anyone finds me." "Exactly," Odelia perked up. "I've been telling you this for years. At Pine Shores, you'll have a panic button in case you fall, a nurse nearby." "But I'm still not ready to make a final decision," I interrupted her. "I need time to get used to the idea of moving. And of course, see the place for myself." Of course, Odelia nodded, not hiding her relief. "We can go there as soon as you feel better. It's very cozy. You'll like it." Toby, who had been silent all this time, finally intervened. "What about Farrell? Did he apologize to you?" I noticed Odelia tense up. Apparently this topic had not been discussed in their family since the incident. "It's okay." I waved my good hand. "He's young and hot-headed. I provoked him with my comments." "No," Sybil said unexpectedly firmly, speaking for the first time. "That's not right. Farrell shouldn't have done that, no matter what you said." Odelia turned to her daughter, clearly annoyed. "Sybil, don't interfere in adult conversations." 17 is old enough to have an opinion, I replied, stepping slightly out of my role as a weak old woman. Sybil looked at me gratefully. At that moment, I saw something of my younger self in her, the same stubbornness, the same determination to stand up for what was right. "Anyway," Odelia clearly wanted to change the subject, "I'm glad you're starting to think more practically, Mom. That's a good sign." The rest of their visit was spent discussing the merits of Pine Shores and the practical aspects of a possible move. I kept the conversation going, asking questions and expressing concern from time to time, but generally giving the impression that I was giving in to their arguments. When they left, Sybil lingered at the door while her parents walked to the car. "Grandma," she said quietly, "you're not really going to move into that nursing home, are you?" I looked closely at my granddaughter. Her insight didn't surprise me. Sybil had always been observant. "Why do you think that?" I asked cautiously. "Because you love this house more than anything else in the world," she replied simply, "and because you're not the kind of person who gives up." I silently hugged her with my good arm, and she responded with unexpected strength. "I won't tell them," she whispered in my ear. "Whatever you decide to do." After they left, I immediately dropped my mask of weakness. The cane went into the corner, the shawl on the hanger. I straightened up and took a deep breath. The game was exhausting, but it was worth it. Judging by Odelia's reaction, my plan had worked. She believed that I was broken and ready to give in. It was time for the next step. I took out my phone and dialed a number I had saved many years ago but had never used. After a few rings, a woman's voice answered. "Hello? Prudence, this is Martha Kingsley," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Gareth's mother." The pause on the other end was so long that I wondered if the line had been disconnected. "Martha?" Prudence finally replied, her voice tinged with surprise. "Has something happened to Farrell?" "No, he's fine as far as I know," I replied. "I'm calling about something else. I'd like to meet with you, if possible." Another pause, this time shorter. "Of course," she said, her voice cautious. "When?" We agreed to meet the next day at a small cafe in a neighboring town, far enough from Port Harlow that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. Prudence arrived right on time, a short woman with short blonde hair and a tired but still attractive face. She looked older than her 51 years, as if life with Gareth and the subsequent divorce had drained her of her strength. She was wearing worn jeans and a simple blouse, and on her wrist was a dog hair bracelet that I remembered from her marriage to my son. "Martha," she smiled uncertainly, sitting down across from me. "I must admit, your call surprised me." "I think that's understandable," I nodded. "We haven't spoken since you and Gareth." "Divorced 7 years ago," she finished for me. "Yes, and I've always regretted it. I mean that we lost touch." We ordered tea and spent a few minutes talking about the weather and the city, avoiding the main topic. Finally, I made up my mind. "Prudence, I need to ask you something. It may seem strange after all these years, but why did you and Gareth really get divorced?" She paled and looked down at her cup. "Gareth didn't tell you?" "Gareth said you just didn't get along," I replied, "but I never believed that." Prudence smiled bitterly. "Not compatible," she repeated. "Well, in a way that's true. If you consider my compatibility to be my inability to accept how he treated you." Now it was my turn to be surprised. "Me? Martha?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with pain. "I couldn't stand watching how they treated you and Odelia, how they talked about you behind your back, how they planned to take your house away from you." "You knew about this?" My voice faltered. "Of course I did. They've been talking about it for years. When Mom finally moves into the nursing home, we can—" And then there was a list of plans for your house and money. I felt a lump rise in my throat. It wasn't a complete surprise, but hearing confirmation of my worst suspicions still hurt. "One day I couldn't take it anymore," Prudence continued. "I told Gareth that it was disgusting to treat his own mother that way, that you deserve respect and the right to decide how you want to live. We had a big fight. And then I found out that he was discussing with Odelia how to convince you to rewrite your will so that most of your inheritance would go to Farrell instead of being divided equally between your grandchildren. And that was the last straw?" I guessed. Yes, she nodded. I realized I couldn't live with a man who valued money more than basic decency. I filed for divorce, and of course Gareth did everything he could to make sure I got the bare minimum. If it weren't for your help back then— My help? I frowned. The $10,000 you gave me through your lawyer friend, Prudence said. It saved me. I was able to pay the first few months' rent and start my little dog training business. I stared at her in shock. I had never given her any money. It could only have been— Well? I whispered. Wellington Hutchins? Yes, I think that was his name. Prudence nodded. He said you wanted to help but were afraid of Gareth's reaction, so you were acting through an intermediary. Cunning old fox. Well, always knew how to stay one step ahead. He must have realized what Prudence was going through and decided to help her on my behalf, knowing I would approve if I knew. Prudence. I covered her hand with mine. I didn't know about the money, but I'm glad— Well, did it. And I'm glad you stood up for me, even when it cost you your marriage. She looked confused. But if you didn't send the money, why did you want to meet now? I told her about the birthday, the fall, the lottery win, everything except my plan for revenge. It wasn't time to reveal all my cards yet. My God, Martha. Prudence looked shocked. Farrell really pushed you? And no one did anything? That's right, I showed her my bandaged wrist, concussion and a broken bone. That's terrible. Prudence shook her head. I don't know what to say. Farrell has always been a difficult child, but I never thought he was capable of physical violence. Like father, like son, I muttered. What? Never mind. I changed the subject. Tell me about your business. You train dogs? Prudence's face lit up, and for the next half hour she talked about her work with therapy dogs, which she trains to help people with psychological trauma, children with developmental disabilities, and elderly people in nursing homes. My dream is to open a full-fledged canine therapy center, she confessed, a place where people can come for sessions with dogs, where group classes and therapeutic meetings can be held. But that requires money, which I don't have. How much would it cost to start a center like that? I asked, trying to make my question sound like ordinary curiosity. At least $200,000, Prudence sighed. Rent, equipment, dog care, salaries for at least a couple of employees to start with. I tried to get a grant, but the competition is fierce, and I don't have any academic degrees or influential patrons. $200,000, almost exactly the amount I won. It couldn't be a mere coincidence. Have you ever thought about a partnership? I asked. If I could find an investor? Prudence shrugged. Of course I have. But who would invest in a business run by a single woman in her 50s with no connections or reputation in the financial world? I smiled, feeling for the first time in a long time that my plan was taking shape. Who knows? The world is full of surprises. We parted an hour later, promising to stay in touch. Prudence seemed a little puzzled by the purpose of our meeting, but she was clearly happy to reconnect. On the way home, I thought about what I had learned. So Prudence had been on my side all these years. She had sacrificed her marriage to protect me from her own son, and now she was barely making ends meet, trying to fulfill her dream, while Gareth lived in luxury and made plans for my house. Justice had to be served. A surprise awaited me at home. Sybil was sitting on the doorstep with a small backpack. "What are you doing here?" I asked, surprised by her appearance. "I told Mom I was going to a friend's house to study for exams," she replied, getting up, "but I really wanted to talk to you, alone." I let her in, wondering what could be so important. "Grandma," Sybil began as soon as we were in the living room, "I know something's going on. You're not going to sell the house and move to Pine Shores, are you?" "Why do you think that?" I asked, studying her face. "Because I know you," she replied simply, "and because I saw how you changed when they left. You straightened up and stopped looking weak. It was impressive." I was silent, not knowing how much I could trust my own granddaughter. Sybil had always been different, more sensitive, more attentive, but she was still Odelia's daughter. "I want to help," she said unexpectedly. "Whatever you decide to do, I'm on your side." "Why?" I asked bluntly. Sybil lowered her eyes for a moment, then replied with unexpected bitterness, "Because I'm tired of how they treat you, how they talk about you behind your back, how they plan to take your house, how they treat you like you're a nuisance." She paused. "And because I'm afraid that someday they'll treat me the same way when I'm old and inconvenient." At that moment, I realized I had found another ally, an unexpected one, but perhaps the most valuable one. "You're right, Sybil," I finally said. "I'm not going to sell the house or move. I have another plan, and yes, I think you can help. But you'll have to keep it a secret, even from your parents, especially from them." Sybil nodded, her eyes flashing with determination. "I'm good at keeping secrets, Grandma, and I want justice to prevail." At that moment, I saw myself in her, the young Martha Kingsley, lawyer and fighter for justice, and I felt the circle beginning to close. The mask of humility had proven useful not only for deceiving children, but also for finding true allies. Prudence, who sacrificed herself for me without knowing I would ever find out. Sybil, who saw through the masks of adults and chose the right side. Perhaps my real family was not the one connected to me by blood, but the one that shared my values and saw me as a person, not a burden or a source of inheritance. With this thought in mind, I began to tell Sybil about my plan, feeling my resolve grow with every word, the mask of weakness finally slipping away, revealing the real Martha Kingsley, a woman who doesn't give up without a fight. I spent the next 2 weeks working out every detail of my plan. My bedroom became a makeshift office, with my bed covered in papers, legal reference books, and notes. I opened a new bank account in a neighboring town and transferred my winnings there. Well helped me draw up the paperwork so that the information would not reach the children. "You've always been meticulous, Martha," he said, looking over the distribution plan I had drawn up. "But now you've outdone yourself." 35 years of legal practice didn't go to waste, I shrugged. "Besides, if you're going to seek revenge, you have to do it smart." "This isn't revenge," Well objected. "It's justice and protecting your interests." We set up a trust fund into which I transferred part of the winnings. This fund was to become an investor in Prudence's business, but I would remain an anonymous benefactor, at least for the time being. The structure was deliberately convoluted, with several levels of trust management to conceal the original source of the funds. "Gareth won't be able to find fault with it, even if he finds out," said Well when we finished with the documents. "Everything is completely legal, and Prudence's contract is drafted in such a way that it protects both her and you. That's the main thing," I nodded. "I want to help her, not create new problems." That same day, I called Prudence and asked for another meeting, this time under the pretext of discussing the possibility of seeing Farrell. We agreed to meet at a small restaurant on the outskirts of Port Harlow, secluded enough that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. Prudence showed up right on time, as always neat and a little tense. This time she had a dog with her, a golden retriever with intelligent eyes and a special therapy dog vest. "This is Sunshine," she said, introducing the dog when I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "I hope you don't mind. I have a class after our meeting today, and I didn't have time to stop by my place." "Of course not," I smiled, reaching out to pet the dog. Solnishko gently nudged my palm with her nose and wagged her tail. "What a beauty." We ordered lunch and spent a few minutes talking about the weather, our health, and the latest city news, the usual small talk. I deliberately took my time, allowing Prudence to relax and get used to my presence. "So, you wanted to talk about Farrell?" she finally asked, when we had finished our main course and moved on to dessert. "Not exactly," I replied, watching her reaction closely. "Or rather, not only about him. I'd like to talk about your work, Prudence, about your Canis Therapy Center." She blinked in surprise. "Center? But I don't have a center, just a small dog training business." "Not yet." I paused. "But maybe soon." I took a thin folder of documents out of my bag and placed it on the table between us. Prudence looked at it in confusion. "What's that?" "A business plan for the Paws of Help Canine Therapy Center, fully funded with legal support and intellectual property protection." Prudence's face became confused as she looked back and forth between the folder and me. "I don't understand." "I want to invest in your dream, Prudence," I said bluntly. "Well, not me personally, but the fund I manage. $200,000 to open a Canis Therapy Center. All you need is your experience, knowledge, and desire to work." She paled and leaned back in her chair. Is this some kind of joke? Or... Her eyes narrowed. Did Gareth send you? Is this his idea to make fun of me? Gareth has nothing to do with this offer, I shook my head, and he doesn't know anything about it. I'm acting independently. But why? Her voice trembled. Why do you want to help me? We haven't spoken in years, and now you're offering me $200,000? I sighed. The truth was too complicated and confusing to explain now without revealing the whole plan. Let's put it this way, I began cautiously. I appreciate what you did for me, how you protected me even when it cost you your marriage, and I believe in your idea. Therapy dogs can help a lot of people, especially in our small town where access to mental health services is limited. Prudence shook her head, still not believing me. But you don't have that kind of money. Gareth always said you lived modestly, that your pension barely covered your expenses. Gareth said a lot of things, I smiled. Not all of it was true. Besides, as I already said, the money isn't coming from me personally, but from the foundation. I'm just helping to channel it into a worthy project. She slowly pulled the folder toward her and opened it. Inside was a detailed business plan, market analysis, profitability forecasts, a floor plan, staffing proposals, a marketing strategy. Everything you could possibly need to start a successful business. This is amazing, Prudence murmured, leafing through the pages. But it's too good to be true. What's the catch? There's no catch, I shrugged. It's a standard investment contract. The fund provides the initial capital and receives 40% of the profits for the first 5 years. Then the share drops to 25%. You get 60% of the profits and full control over operations. The only condition is that the center must provide a certain number of free sessions for low-income families and the elderly. I added the last part recently, thinking about how to expand the center's impact on the city. It's a little revenge on Gareth and Odelia, helping the very old people they were so eager to push aside. Prudence studied the figures carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. I saw the disbelief in her eyes gradually give way to hope, then determination. This could really work, she finally said, but I don't understand why you're doing this for me. Consider it my way of restoring justice, I replied, and an investment in the future. Our city needs a center like this, and you're the person who can run it. Prudence took several deep breaths, as if trying to comprehend what was happening. What if I fail? She asked quietly. What if the business doesn't work out? Then we'll close with minimal losses, I shrugged. But I'm sure that won't happen. I've seen how you work with Solnishko. You know what you're doing. Prudence looked at her dog, who had been lying quietly at her feet the whole time, and her face softened. I need to think about it, she said. It's too big a decision to make right away. Of course, I nodded. Take the documents home, study them carefully. You have a week to think about it, then we'll meet again and you can give me your answer. As we said goodbye at the restaurant door, Prudence suddenly hugged me tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Even if I don't decide to take your offer, thank you for believing in me. I returned home with the feeling that things were going exactly as they should. The plan was beginning to take shape. I was sure Prudence would agree. I had seen the hunger in her eyes when she studied the business plan, the hunger to realize her dream, to prove her worth. Maybe to prove to Gareth, too, that she was capable of more than he thought. A surprise awaited me at home. Odelia had left a message on the answering machine. Mom, Toby and I will stop by tomorrow to show you the Pine Shores brochures. They're having an open house on Saturday, and we could all go together. Call me back when you get this message. I smiled as I listened to her voice. So confident, so pleased. She thought she had won, that I had broken down and agreed to their plan. Well, let her think that. My mask of humility had to stay in place for a while longer. I called back and confirmed that I would be happy to have them visit. Then I called Sybil. We had agreed that she would keep me informed about any family conversations that took place behind my back. They're very happy, Sybil said, lowering her voice. She was probably talking from her room, afraid her parents would hear. Mom is already discussing with Dad how they're going to renovate the north wing of the house when they get their share of the sale. And Uncle Gareth keeps talking about how he and Farrell are going to convert the boathouse into a studio. What about my move to Pine Shores? I asked, feeling a wave of anger rising inside me. Are they even discussing what it will be like for me there? Honestly? Sybil's voice grew even quieter. No, they just talk about how convenient it will be, that you'll be under supervision, and that they won't have to visit you so often. Mom even said she'll finally be able to go on vacation without worrying about you. I squeezed the phone so hard my fingers turned white. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that anger was a poor advisor. Cold calculation was what I needed right now. Thanks for letting me know, Sybil, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Keep your ears open, and don't let on that we've been talking. Don't worry, Grandma, she said, smiling. I'm a great actress. Mom still thinks I'm in drama club just because the director is cute. The next day, I met Odelia and Toby in full accordance with my new image, in an old robe, with a shawl over my shoulders, leaning on a cane. I even shook the hand holding my teacup slightly, as if I had developed a tremor. Mom, how are you feeling? Odelia gave me an appraising look. You look tired. It's my age, dear, I sighed with a sad smile. There's nothing we can do about it. That's exactly why we're talking about Pine Shores. Odelia sat down next to me, laying out glossy brochures on the coffee table. Look at all the amenities, round-the-clock medical care, an activity center, even a heated pool. And a library, added Toby, as taciturn as ever. We know how much you love to read. I flipped through the brochures, pretending to study them carefully, although inside I was seething with indignation. Photos of smiling elderly people in immaculate but faceless rooms, nurses in snow-white uniforms, a dining room that looked like a hospital. Everything was sterile, everything was convenient, and completely lifeless. It looks nice, I said finally, closing the brochure, but I'm not sure I can afford a place like this. It looks expensive. Don't worry about that. Odelia waved her hand. Selling the house will cover the costs for years to come, and Gareth and I will always help if you need anything. I almost laughed in her face. They plan to take my house and then help me live off the money from its sale. How generous. That's very kind of you, I muttered, lowering my eyes to hide my anger. I'll think about it, I really will. Saturday is open house, Odelia reminded me. We'll pick you up around 10 in the morning, okay? Sure, dear, I smiled weakly. I'll be ready. After they left, I dropped my mask of helplessness and paced around the house with quick, energetic steps, trying to calm down. Then I called Vel and told her about the visit. They really think I'll agree to this, I concluded, that I'll sell the house I've lived in for 30 years and move into a sterile box so they can split the money. Greed is blind, Vel remarked philosophically. They see what they want to see. By the way, I got confirmation from the bank that the trust fund has been officially established and is ready to go. As soon as Prudence signs the contract, the money will be transferred. Great, I said, feeling a rush of energy. Now we just need to make sure she agrees. Do you have a plan? Of course, I smiled. I always have a plan. The next day, I called Prudence and suggested we meet again, this time at Wells' office to discuss the legal details of the contract. She agreed, although I could still hear the uncertainty in her voice. Well met us in his small but elegant office in the city center. Prudence looked nervous but determined. I've reviewed the documents, she said when we settled into the conference room. I have a few questions. For the next 2 hours, we discussed every clause of the contract and every detail of the business plan. Well explained the legal intricacies, and I added my perspective from a business strategy standpoint. Prudence asked sharp, intelligent questions, showing that she was not a naive dreamer, but a person with business acumen. You've really thought this through, she said finally, leaning back in her chair. It's impressive. So you agree? Well asked, pulling out a copy of the contract for her to sign. Prudence took a deep breath, glanced at me, then nodded decisively. Yes, I agree. She signed the documents, Well notarized them, and it was done. Paws of Help had officially gone from dream to reality. Congratulations, you're now a business owner, Well smiled, shaking Prudence's hand. Co-owner, she corrected, looking at me. And I won't let you down, Martha, I promise. When we left the office, Prudence still looked a little dazed. I can't believe this is happening, she said, shaking her head. Yesterday I was training dogs in a small rented room, and today I have the money to open a real center. Life is full of surprises, I said, patting her on the arm. Now we need to find the right place and start renovating. The sooner we get the center up and running, the better. There's one place I've had my eye on for a while, Prudence admitted. A former gym on Maple Street. It's been vacant for a year, and the space is perfect for our needs. A large hall for group classes, several small rooms for individual sessions, and even a small backyard for walking dogs. Sounds perfect, I nodded. Get in touch with the owner and find out if it's available to rent or buy. I'll do it today, Prudence beamed. I can't wait to tell Sunshiny. She'll be thrilled with the new workplace. I smiled as I watched her walk away, her steps lighter, her shoulders straighter. Whatever happened next, I had already helped one person find new hope. It was a good start. When I got home, I found Farrell on my doorstep. He was sitting on the steps, buried in his phone, and jumped up when he saw me. "Grandma!" His voice was unnaturally cheerful. "I've been waiting for you. Where were you?" "At the doctor's," I lied, trying to sound weak and leaning on my cane more than necessary. "What are you doing here, Farrell?" "Just stopped by to see my beloved grandmother," he smiled broadly, but his eyes remained cold. "Can I come in?" I opened the door and let him in, mentally preparing myself for an unpleasant conversation. Farrell never came over just like that. There was always a reason. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, slowly moving toward the kitchen. "No thanks," he said, flopping down on the living room sofa and putting his feet up on the coffee table. "I heard you're moving into a nursing home. My father says you've finally come to your senses." I grimaced at his tactlessness but kept my composure. "I'm considering it," I replied, carefully lowering myself into the chair opposite him. "This house is getting too big for me." "Yeah, right," he said, looking around appraisingly. "This place could use some renovating. Dad says his share of the sale will go toward my education and maybe a new car." There it was, the real reason for his visit. "What kind of car are we talking about?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Well, I've got my eye on a model," he tried to say casually, but I could see the greedy gleam in his eyes. "Nothing fancy, just a good, reliable car. But my father says the money from the sale of the house won't be available for another couple of months, and I need a car now." "And?" I raised an eyebrow. "And I thought maybe you could give me a little advance." He tried to smile charmingly, but it came out fake. "Towards the future sale. It's only $10,000. You'll get it back when you sell the house anyway." I was silent, staring at my grandson. This young man, my own grandson, had pushed me so hard that I had a concussion and a broken wrist. Now he was sitting in my house with his feet up on my coffee table, demanding $10,000 for a car, thinking I owed him. Anger rose inside me, hot and fierce, but I forced myself to remain calm. It wasn't time to show my true feelings yet. "I don't have that kind of money, Farrell," I said quietly. "My pension barely covers the cost of maintaining the house." "Come on, Grandma." He leaned forward, his voice hardening. "You must have some savings. You were a lawyer. You made good money." "Everything I earned went toward your and Odelia's education, toward helping your families." I shook my head. "I have nothing but this house." "I don't believe you." Farrell frowned. "Father says you've always been stingy. I'm sure you have a stash somewhere." "If I did, do you think I'd be living like this?" I spread my arms, pointing to the worn furniture, the old wallpaper, the creaky floor. "Look around you, Farrell. Does this look like the home of someone with money?" He glanced around the room with a dissatisfied look, then stared at me again. "So, you refuse to help me?" His voice took on a threatening tone. "After everything our family has done for you?" I almost laughed in his face. After everything they had done for me? After ignoring me, manipulating me, planning to take my house away from me? After he pushed me and didn't even apologize properly, but I held back, maintaining the mask of a helpless old woman. "I'm very sorry, Farrell, but I really can't help you," I said with a sigh. "Maybe you could get a job over the summer? Save up for a down payment?" "Work?" He snorted as if I had suggested something indecent. "I have school and practice. When would I work?" "At your age, many young people combine school and work," I remarked. "Yeah, those who don't have rich relatives," he snapped. "You know what? Forget it." I'll find another way. He stood up abruptly, almost knocking over the coffee table. Farrell, I said, also standing up, leaning on my cane. I really wanted to help, but you're too greedy, he interrupted, heading for the door. I understand. I'll remember that the next time my father suggests I visit you. He left, slamming the door loudly. I slowly sank back into the chair, feeling my hands tremble. Not from feigned weakness now, but from suppressed anger. Patience, Martha, I told myself. Things will change soon. I called Well and told him about Farrell's visit. He listened silently, only occasionally grunting or sighing. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, he said finally. Gareth was the same at his age. Not quite, I objected. Gareth was selfish, but not that bad. It's a new generation. Well, they think the world owes them something. And your children have contributed to that, he remarked. But don't worry, they'll all get a lesson they'll remember for a long time. After talking to Well, I called Prudence to find out the latest on the center's new location. She answered on the first ring, her voice ringing with excitement. Martha, I just got back from looking at the place. The owner is willing to sign a long-term lease with an option to buy in 3 years. The terms are excellent, even better than I had hoped, and he's ready to start the paperwork as early as next week. That's wonderful, I smiled, feeling the bad mood from Farrell's visit gradually dissipate. When do you think we can start renovating? As soon as we sign the lease. How about in 2 weeks? I've already made a list of the work that needs to be done and even found a contractor who specializes in commercial properties. Great. I made a note in my diary. Well, will help me review the lease agreement, and I'd like to take a look at the place when you have time. Sure, maybe tomorrow? I can pick you up around 2 if that works for you. We set up the meeting and I hung up, feeling satisfied with how quickly this part of my plan was coming together. Prudence was efficient and decisive, qualities I'd always admired in people. That evening, Sybil called. She spoke quietly, almost in a whisper. Grandma, I have news. Farrell came to our house after he was at yours. He was furious. He said you were a stingy old witch and that you couldn't give him money for a car even though you were about to get a lot of money from selling the house. And what did your parents say? I asked, already guessing the answer. Dad didn't say anything as usual, Sybil said contemptuously, and Mom explained to Farrell that the money from the sale of the house would mainly go to pay for your stay at Pine Shores, and the rest would be divided between her and Uncle Gareth, and that they've already decided what they're going to spend their shares on. They didn't even wait for me to move out before they started dividing up the money, I muttered. Exactly, Sybil agreed, but there's something else. When Farrell left, I heard Mom tell Dad that she was worried about your condition, that you've become too easygoing and it's not like you. She's afraid you might be in the early stages of dementia. I couldn't help but laugh. Well, my act as a senile old woman was too convincing. Yes, but now she wants you to see a neurologist, Sybil warned. She says it needs to be done before the house is sold to avoid problems with the paperwork. That could be a problem. A real doctor will quickly determine that I'm in perfect mental health. Thanks for the warning, I said. I'll think of something. Grandma, Sybil's voice became serious. Be careful. If they suspect you're faking it... Don't worry, I said, trying to sound confident. I have everything under control. After talking to Sybil, I thought about it. The situation was getting complicated. If Odelia insisted on a medical examination, my plan could be in jeopardy. I had to speed things up. I called Vel and explained the situation. We need to finalize the contract with Prudence and start renovating the premises as soon as possible, I said. If Odelia drags me to a doctor and he declares me fully competent, they may suspect something is wrong. I agree, replied Well. I'll speed up the paperwork. You keep playing your part. Let them think they're in complete control. The next day, I met with Prudence, and we looked at the space for the future center together. It was a spacious former gym with high ceilings, large windows, and a separate courtyard. The perfect place for canistherapy. The space needed some renovation, but the main structure was solid. This will be the group activity area, Prudence said enthusiastically. Those are the rooms for individual sessions, and this part could be a small cafe where clients could relax after their sessions. A cafe? I raised an eyebrow. It wasn't part of the original plan. I thought it could be an additional source of income, she explained. A simple menu, organic food, a place where people could interact with dogs in a relaxed setting. The idea was good. In fact, it was better than my original concept. I like it, I nodded. It will make the center more open to the community, attract people who may not need therapy, but love animals. Prudence beamed with approval. I've already contacted a contractor. He's ready to start work as soon as we sign the lease. He estimates that the renovations will take about a month. Great, I jotted down in my notebook. The sooner we get the center up and running, the better. On the way back, Prudence suddenly asked, Martha, can I ask you a personal question? Of course, I turned to her. Why are you helping me and not your children or Farrell? She glanced at me quickly. Don't get me wrong, I'm infinitely grateful, but it's unusual. I was silent for a long time, thinking about my answer. The truth was too complicated, too personal to share completely, but I could tell her part of it. Because you deserve it, I finally replied. Because you protected me when my own children didn't, and because your idea is valuable, it will help many people, including those my children don't even think about. Prudence nodded slowly, accepting my answer. We drove to my house in comfortable silence. Thank you, she said as I got out of the car, for everything. Don't thank me until you see the results, I smiled. We're just getting started. On Saturday, as planned, Odelia and Toby picked me up to take me to Pine Shores for the open house. I was ready, in an old-fashioned dress with a cane and a slight tremor in my hands that I had learned to imitate over the past few days. Mom, are you feeling okay? Odelia asked, helping me into the car. You look pale. I'm just a little nervous, I replied, making my voice tremble. It's a big decision. Don't worry, Odelia patted my hand. You'll like it there, and we'll visit you often. As often as now? I wanted to ask, but I held back. Pine Shores was exactly as I had expected. A clean, sterile institution disguised as a cozy residential complex. Smiling staff, group activities for seniors, a medical center with state-of-the-art equipment. Everything was perfect and completely lifeless. We looked at a model apartment, a small studio with a miniature kitchen and a bathroom adapted for the disabled. After the spacious Victorian house, this place seemed like a cage. What do you think, Mom? Odelia asked when we finished the tour. Isn't it wonderful here? Very neat, I replied, trying to sound confident. But isn't it a bit institutional? What do you mean? Odelia frowned. Everything here is so the same. Regulated, I said, gesturing around the hall where we were standing. In my house, everything has a history. Every corner is full of memories. Mom, Odelia sighed with obvious impatience. We've talked about this. Your house is too big, too old, too dangerous for you. Here you'll have security, company, medical care. I know, dear, I paused, then added, as if giving in, You're probably right. I just need time to get used to the idea of moving. Odelia beamed, clearly pleased with my capitulation. Of course, Mom, we're in no rush. Maybe in a month or two, when you're ready. I nodded with a sad smile, thinking that in a month the situation would be completely different. By then, the Paws of Help Canistherapy Center would be open, my children would find out about my win, and their plans for my house would fall apart. The legal trick I had used was a reliable defense, but real satisfaction would come when they realized that I had been leading them on all this time. That old Martha Kingsley was not as simple as they thought. For now, I continued to play my part, letting them think they had won. A month flew by unnoticed. Every day was filled with tasks related to the Canistherapy Center, checking on the progress of repairs, selecting equipment, and coordinating documents. Prudence worked with amazing energy, as if she had grown 10 years younger. She brought in 2 more canistherapy specialists and a veterinarian, found suppliers for the cafe, and developed programs for different groups of clients. I helped with the administrative side, using my experience in managing a law firm. All this time, I continued to play my role in front of the children. Odelia called regularly to ask how I was feeling and subtly remind me about Pine Shores. I responded evasively, giving the impression that I was gradually coming to terms with the inevitable. Gareth stopped by twice, each time with a roll of blueprints and plans for renovating the house after the sale. I nodded, agreed, and pretended to be interested, even though I was seething with indignation inside. Farrell didn't show up again. He must have decided that there was nothing to be gained from the stingy old witch. That suited me just fine. Sybil became my eyes and ears in the Odell family. She reported every conversation, every plan related to me or the house. Once she came in particularly agitated. "Grandma, they're planning to speed up your move. Mom spoke with the administration at Pine Shores and a place is available next month. She wants you to move then." "That means we need to act quickly," I replied, checking my calendar. "Do you think you can convince your parents to come to the opening of the Canis Therapy Center this Saturday?" "Center?" Sybil looked puzzled. "You mean the Prudence Center? Why should they go there?" "Because I'm inviting them," I smiled, "as the guest of honor and the main investor." Sybil's eyes widened when she realized, "So that's what you did with your winnings? You invested in Prudence's business? Oh my God, Mom and Uncle Gareth are going to be furious." "Not just invested," I nodded, "but I was actively involved in setting it up. It's time they knew that old Martha Kingsley wasn't quite ready to kick the bucket yet." Sybil laughed, but then she became serious. "They might not come, especially if they find out Prudence will be there." "Then don't mention her," I shrugged. "Tell them there's a new animal therapy center opening in town and you'd really like to go. Use your interest in psychology." "Okay," Sybil nodded. "I'll try. What about Uncle Gareth and Farrell?" "I'll take care of them," I winked at her. "I have a plan." That same day, I called Gareth. He didn't answer right away, and I could tell from his voice that my call had surprised him. I wasn't usually the one to initiate communication. "Mom, is something wrong?" "No, dear, everything's fine," I said, trying to make my voice sound weak and a little uncertain. "I just wanted to tell you that I've thought about your offer, about the house." "And?" His voice sounded impatient. "I think you and Odelia are right. The house is too big for me, and maybe Pine Shores really is the best option." "Wonderful, Mom!" he exclaimed, unable to hide his joy. "I'm so glad you finally made a sensible decision." "Yes," I paused. "But before we start the process, I'd like you and Farrell to attend an event this Saturday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's important to me." "What kind of event?" His voice sounded wary. "The opening of a new center in town," I replied evasively. "I promised my friend I'd go. You know, at my age, there isn't much entertainment." "Okay," Gareth agreed reluctantly, "but don't stay long. I have a lot to do on Saturday." "Of course, dear." I allowed myself a slight smile, which fortunately he couldn't see. "You're always so busy." After talking to Gareth, I called Prudence to make sure everything was ready for the opening. The renovations were complete, the equipment was installed, and the staff was trained. Advertisements for the opening of the Paws to Paws Canine Therapy Center were placed in the local newspaper and on billboards throughout the city. "Are you nervous?" I asked, hearing the excitement in her voice. "Crazy," Prudence admitted, "but it's a good kind of nervous. I still can't believe this is really happening." "Believe it," I smiled, "and get ready for a surprise on opening day." "A surprise?" Her voice was filled with curiosity. "What kind of surprise?" "You'll see," I replied mysteriously. "Just be ready for anything." On the evening before the opening, Well and I did a final check of all the documents. Everything was ready: the contracts, the amended will, the trust fund, proof of my lottery win. It was a legally watertight package that left my children no chance of contesting my decisions. "Are you sure you want to do this publicly?" Well asked when we were finished. "You could have told them in a more private setting." "No," I shook my head. "They humiliated me publicly. Let the consequences be public too." The morning of the opening was sunny and warm, as if nature itself approved of my plan. I abandoned my cane and shawl and put on a new deep blue suit that I had bought especially for the occasion. I did my hair and applied light makeup. Looking in the mirror, I didn't see a helpless old woman, but the confident woman I had always been. At 1:45, I arrived at the center. The building was unrecognizable: a fresh facade in warm colors, a large sign reading "Helping Hands," and an elegant entrance with a ramp for wheelchairs. A small crowd had already gathered in front of the center. Curious townspeople, representatives of the local media, and potential clients. Prudence met me at the entrance. her face beaming with excitement. "Martha, you look amazing," she exclaimed, hugging me. "Not at all like you've been the last few weeks. Are you better?" "You could say that," I smiled. "You'll understand soon enough." Inside, the center looked even better than it did from the outside. A spacious hall with wooden floors and soft lighting, comfortable armchairs and sofas arranged in groups for classes. A small cafe with organic drinks and snacks was already open in the corner. In a special area behind a low partition were the dogs, 6 trained therapy animals of different breeds, including a golden retriever named Sunshiny. I noticed that Odelia, Toby, and Sybil were already among the guests. My daughter looked slightly annoyed, as if she didn't understand why she had been called here. Toby, as usual, seemed detached. Sybil was barely holding back a smile, knowing what was about to happen. A few minutes later, Gareth and Farrell appeared. My son immediately tensed up when he saw Prudence, but it was too late to back out. At 2 o'clock, Prudence stepped into the center of the room and addressed the gathering. "Good afternoon. I am delighted to welcome you to the opening of the Paws of Help Canine Therapy Center. Our center was created to help people through interaction with specially trained dogs. We offer individual and group sessions for children with developmental disabilities, people with anxiety disorders, depression, post-traumatic stress, and the elderly. In addition, we have a cozy cafe where you can simply spend time in the company of our 4-legged therapists." She paused, glancing around at the audience. "But before we officially open the doors of our center, I would like to introduce you to the person without whom none of this would have been possible. The woman who believed in my dream and provided the means to make it a reality. The person whose wisdom, experience, and support made Paws of Help a reality. Please welcome Ms. Martha Kingsley." A whisper of surprise ran through the room. I noticed Odelia and Gareth exchange puzzled glances. Sybil smiled broadly, and Farrell looked as if he had seen a ghost. I stepped forward, trying to stand straight and confident. No trembling hands, no cane, no feigned weakness. "Thank you, Prudence," I said, glancing around the room. "It is an honor to be part of this project. Paws for Help is not just a business. It is a mission to help those who are often overlooked in our society. Children with special needs, the elderly, women who have experienced violence." I paused, deliberately looking at my children. "Recently, I had a stroke of luck. I won $250,000 in the lottery, and I decided to invest that money in something that really matters, something that will help people long after I'm gone." Odelia's face paled, and Gareth froze with his mouth open. Farrell looked at me as if he couldn't believe his eyes. "I want to especially thank my sister-in-law Prudence for her dedication to this project and for her courage, and also my granddaughter Sybil, who supported me during difficult times." Sybil smiled radiantly, and Odelia glanced at her daughter in surprise. "And now, let's officially open the Paws of Hope Center." I stepped aside, giving Prudence room for the traditional ribbon-cutting ceremony. After the official part, the guests began to explore the center and meet its 4-legged employees. People scattered around the hall, looking at the premises, talking to the dogs, and asking questions to the staff. I noticed Odelia walking decisively toward me, with Gareth following her. "Mom, what does all this mean?" she demanded, coming up close to me. "What profit? What investments? And why do you suddenly look healthy?" "Because I am healthy, Odelia," I replied calmly. "I have always been healthy, and of sound mind." "But your wrist, you could barely walk. You said you agreed to sell the house." Gareth looked as if he had been betrayed. "I did have a wrist injury and a concussion after your son pushed me, Gareth." I looked him straight in the eye. "But I've recovered long ago. And as for selling the house, I never intended to sell it. I just gave you what you wanted to hear." "You lied to us?" Odelia looked shocked. "Were you honest with me?" I countered. "When you discussed behind my back how you would divide the money from the sale of my house, when you planned how you would remodel it to suit your needs, without even waiting for me to move to Pinewood." They both fell silent, unable to find words to justify themselves. "So there won't be any move?" Gareth finally asked. "And no money from the sale of the house, either?" "That's right," I confirmed. "I'm staying in my house, and the money from the winnings, as you already know, has been invested in this center." "But that's "That's not fair," Gareth blurted out. "You could have helped your family, and instead you gave everything into her." He nodded toward Prudence, who was currently introducing one of the dogs to a group of visitors. "Fair, Gareth?" I smiled. "You want to talk about fairness? Is it fair how you've treated me these past few years? How you plan to dispose of my property as if I were already dead? How you ignored the fact that your son physically assaulted me?" Odelia and Gareth exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to respond. "But we're your children," Odelia finally said, as if that explained everything. "We cared about you." "No, dear," I shook my head. "You cared about my property, about what you could get from me. The real care I got from Prudence, from Sybil, from my old friends who see me as a person, not a wallet or a burden." At that moment, Farrell approached us. He looked confused and a little scared. "Grandma," he began uncertainly, I didn't know you won the lottery. Congratulations." I looked at my grandson, noticing his fake smile and nervous movements. He was clearly trying to make up for his previous behavior, hoping to get some of my money. "Thank you, Farrell," I replied coldly, "but as you can see, the money's already been invested." "Yes, of course," he nodded. "That's a great idea. Actually, I've always been interested in animal therapy. Maybe I could help out here somehow? Volunteer or—" "I don't think that's a good idea," I interrupted him, "considering your personality. Remember our last conversation?" Farrell blushed and lowered his eyes. "Listen," Gareth tried to take control of the situation. "Let's not make a scene in public. We can discuss this at home as a family." "Oh, we're not in public anymore," I pointed out and nodded to the side. "We're in my office, and we have another conversation to have about my new will." I led them into a small office at the back of the center, where Well was waiting for us with a folder of documents. Odelia and Gareth looked tense, Farrell confused. Sybil slipped in behind us, closing the door behind her. "Mr. Hutchins," Odelia nodded to Well, clearly recognizing him. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I've been assisting your mother with legal matters," Well replied in a formal tone, "and I'd be happy to explain the new terms of her will." "New terms?" Gareth echoed. "What new terms?" Well opened the folder and began to explain in a dry, professional tone. Mrs. Kingsley made significant changes to her will. The house and most of her property are now bequeathed to a charitable foundation that helps women who are victims of domestic violence. The foundation will use the house as a shelter and rehabilitation center. The fund will be managed by a board of directors, which will include Prudence Kingsley and, upon reaching the age of 21, Sybil Brooks. Odelia paled even more, and Gareth clenched his fists. "Is this some kind of joke?" he hissed. "You're depriving us of our inheritance in favor of some foundation, and you're putting my ex-wife in charge of it?" "Not entirely," I clarified. "You and Odelia will each receive $50,000. It's not a large sum, but it's fair, considering how you've treated me over the years." "We will contest this will," Odelia declared, finding her voice. "You were clearly not in your right mind when you wrote it." "I'm afraid that will be difficult," Well interjected. "The will is legally sound. We have medical reports confirming Mrs. Kingsley's full legal capacity, certified witness statements, and a video recording of the signing process. Furthermore, given your mother's professional experience as a lawyer, the court will be particularly sensitive to any attempts to contest her wishes." "But this... Gareth couldn't find the words. "Unfair?" I finished for him. "Life is often unfair, Gareth. Ask your son." Farrell, who had been silent until then, suddenly exploded. "So this is revenge? Because I accidentally bumped into you? You're depriving the whole family of their inheritance because of one mistake?" "Not because of one mistake, Farrell, I shook my head. "Because of years of mistreatment. Because of how your father and aunt planned to dispose of my house without even asking my opinion. Because of how you demanded money for a car, thinking I owed it to you. Because of how all of you saw me as nothing more than a nuisance or a source of inheritance." A heavy silence hung in the room. No one knew what to say. "So what now?" Odelia finally asked. "Are you just cutting us out of your life?" "No," I sighed. "You are my children, and I will always love you. But I will no longer allow you to treat me like a burden. I am staying in my house, continuing to be actively involved in the work of this center, and I will live my life the way I see fit. If you want to be part of that life, as equals, with respect, I will be happy. If not, well, that's your choice. Gareth was the first to get up. Let's go, Farrell. There's nothing left for us here. Odelia followed him, but turned back at the door. You'll regret this, Mom, when you're all alone. I'm not alone, I replied calmly. I have people who appreciate me for who I am. A real family isn't necessarily one that's bound by blood. When they left, only Sybil and I remained in the room. My granddaughter came over and hugged me tightly. You were magnificent, Grandma, she whispered. They deserved it. I hope you understand that your relationship with your parents may become more complicated now, Well remarked, turning to Sybil. I'll survive, she shrugged. After all, I'm only a year away from coming of age. Then I can decide for myself where and with whom I want to live. We returned to the main hall, where the opening celebration was in full swing. Prudence, noticing our return, approached with a concerned look. Is everything all right? I saw Gareth and Odelia leave. They looked upset. Everything's fine, I assured her. Just family stuff. Don't worry about it. Tell me how the class sign-ups are going. Her face lit up. Amazingly well. We already have 15 sign-ups for individual sessions and 3 groups for seniors. Many people say that the city has needed a center like this for a long time. See? I smiled. I told you it was a good idea. The rest of the day passed in a pleasant flurry of activity. People came and went, admiring the center, interacting with the dogs, and asking questions about the programs. Journalists from the local newspaper took several photos and interviewed Prudence. By evening, we were all exhausted but happy. What now? Prudence asked as we closed the center. After everything that happened to your family. Now we move on, I shrugged. We work, we help people, we enjoy life. What about Gareth and Odelia? Time will tell, I sighed. Maybe they'll rethink their attitude. Maybe they won't. Either way, I did what I had to do. When I got home, I found an unstamped envelope in my mailbox. Someone had delivered it personally. Inside was a short letter, written in shaky handwriting. Grandma, I want to apologize for pushing you. It was wrong. I didn't think it was that serious. I was just angry. I hope you can forgive me someday. Farrell. I reread the letter several times, trying to figure out if it was sincere or just another attempt at manipulation. It didn't matter now. I put the letter on the table, deciding not to respond, at least not yet. That night, I lay awake for a long time, replaying the events of the day in my head. I felt no triumph or schadenfreude, only a quiet satisfaction that justice had been served, and relief, as if a weight I had been carrying for years had finally fallen from my shoulders. I won the lottery on my 78th birthday. But the real winning ticket wasn't that piece of paper with numbers on it. It was my determination to take control of my life, to reject the role of a helpless old woman that had been forced upon me, to find a new family, not by blood, but by spirit. In the end, it doesn't matter how old you are. What matters is how you live each day. And I was going to live the rest of my years on my own terms, with dignity, purpose, and a real family by my side.